All right, so we're really excited to have you all at our first Dialogues event. We'll tell you a little bit more about this collaboration soon, but first, thank you for being with us today to talk about imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome can plague creatives at nearly every stage of their career. It has the ability to debilitate creativity and productivity. But what is imposter syndrome and why does it seem to impact some designers more than others?
So we'll go through the answer to that question in today's event. We'll start out with a little bit of an introduction into, as Jamie mentioned, what imposter syndrome is, how it affects some designers differently than others. We'll go into a panel discussion after the introduction, and we'll hear from our three panelists who will introduce in more detail in just a minute. We'll follow that up with some group discussions for about half an hour, and these discussions will be moderated by our panelists and by the organizations that are hosting this event. And they will be guided conversations that will allow you as attendees to talk through the same questions and issues that our panelists have discussed. And then at the end, we will reconnect and share out our thoughts. For our attendees who are here, I did want to let you know we are recording in the main room. When we break out into the small group discussions, those will not be recorded. So feel free to discuss candidly in those, but be aware that anything that you share in the main group will be recorded, and it will end up on YouTube to be shared with the broader community. So we appreciate your awareness.
Okay. So to tell you a little bit more about ourselves as organizations, I'm with Being, which is an advanced design initiative that focuses on the holistic wellness of the creative community. We like to focus primarily on the emotional and mental health of our community, and we're just here to support each other in what it means to be human. My name is Jamie, and I have been with Advanced Design for about 5 years now. I'm Chicago-based, and I am trained in industrial design, but I'm more interested in using design as a way to cultivate connection and think a little bit more critically about the ways that we stigmatize very real parts of our being. I would also like to introduce another part of our person in my team, Nino, if you wouldn't mind just saying hello.
Hi everyone, my name is Nino, and I'm a designer. I help out with advanced design for like different initiatives, and I've been with advanced design for like about a year or so. I've been trained or studied molecular cell biology, and for the first quarter of my life, I've been in the sciences, and I have recently graduated from an interaction design grad program, and currently navigating where I want to take my design career from there.
Thanks, Nino. And I'm going to pass it off to Kat to tell us a little bit more about Design Allyship and herself.
All right. Yeah, I'm Katarina, and I co-founded Design Allyship in late 2020 after the fateful Yanko design post that T made. And together, she and I have been working together to provide designers with actionable resources. The intention being here to lift up all designers and then to spread allyship among the community to increase the general education and inclusivity of the industrial design community. So some of these tools include the guide that we published in early 2021, How to Be a Better Ally to Women in Industrial Design, which you can download for free from our website. And overall, we really want to create resources that can be shared and distributed, as well as creating spaces like this one that center the dialogues and voices of designers from marginalized backgrounds. So I myself am a queer woman and a 1.5 generation American. I have one parent who's not originally from the United States. So that has definitely shaped the way that I experience the world and how those identities intersect with my identity as a designer as well. So I'm really excited to bring this partnership together and to kind of kick off what we hope is an ongoing event series. So we're really excited to have you here. All right, and to that point, we are gathered here for this very first inaugural dialogue. So we hope that these will be a series of small group discussions, as I mentioned, centering the professional experiences of marginalized designers who may have identities such as being women, Black, Indigenous people of color, queer, disabled, or otherwise marginalized designers are central to these conversations. What we want to do is share the collective wisdom among these designers, and then as well create create lenses for future design allies to see how they can be better allies, to build empathy and bridges in the community, and to create these connections among ourselves with the overall intention of making the industry a better place.
Before we dive in too deep, we've put together a list of a few mental health resources. We would like to set a disclaimer that we work within this collaboration and within the Being Initiative, and it focuses on mental, emotional, and social well-being. While we are not trained mental health professionals, we believe it's important to create space for discussing topics that are typically conveniently left out of the narrative. This is a platform of self and community care, and with that said, touchy subjects are bound to arise. This is a safe space to discuss our thoughts and feelings. However, if at any point you feel uncomfortable with something, please do your best to ensure your own comfort. So whether that's taking a break, talking to someone, or addressing it right there on the spot, please feel safe in doing so. And when entering the space, we agree to the Advanced Design Code of Conduct. And this means that we're going to show up for ourselves and each other by being intentional about the ways that we learn and communicate here.
Okay. All right, so before we dive into the background information on imposter syndrome, I did just want to disclose that much of the framework that we used here came from a wonderful article on imposter syndrome and how it impacts women, which was published by Ruchika Tulsian and Jodi Ann Bury in the Harvard Business Review. So we've linked it below. We can also share this with our attendees after the fact, but they do a great job of explaining the intersection of imposter syndrome and identity in more detail.
Yes. So the impact of systemic racism, classism, xenophobia, and other biases was absent when the concept of imposter syndrome was developed. Many groups were excluded from the study, namely women of color and people of various income levels, genders, and professional backgrounds. Even as we note today, imposter syndrome puts the blame on individuals without accounting for the historical and cultural contexts that are foundational to how it manifests for different people and different lived experiences. Imposter syndrome directs our view forward, fixing people at work instead of fixing the places where we work. Today, we're going to break down some of the preconceptions that we may have about imposter syndrome, redefining who is an imposter and who belongs, and share real strategies for overcoming feelings of self-doubt, which is very natural. First, I will speak a little bit to types of imposters, which include perfectionists that set extremely high expectations for themselves, experts who feel the need to know every piece of information before they start a project, natural geniuses, which are considered to use skills that come very easily to them and feel very natural. Soloists feel that they have to accomplish tasks on their own, and super women, men, and people who push themselves to work harder than those around them. These driving forces or motives may combine with the others in the list as a way to protect oneself and their insecurities that are typically internalized as a result of an unsupportive industry or environment.
Okay. I'd also like to add a little bit of context to the history of imposter syndrome and why we even call it a syndrome in the first place. So to talk about pathologizing experiences, I'd like to first define what that means. So pathologizing a behavior means that we're ascribing abnormality to something that's actually quite common and natural. So the act of calling this feeling of being an imposter a syndrome, it pathologizes a common feeling and experience that is present nearly universally at some point in everyone's career. In regard to women's experiences in particular, there's a history of pathologizing anger and distress as hysteria, which stems from the Greek word hystera for uterus. And the categorization of this otherwise normal female behavior, anger, distress, emotions, as a disease has actually resulted in the forcible commitment of thousands of women for behavior that transgresses the social expectations of women. So by that dint, similarly, imposter syndrome is pathologizing the experience of feeling like an outsider. Again, ascribing this abnormality to what is otherwise a completely normal experience to great negative effect. And, really at the end of it, feeling unsure of yourself does not make you an imposter. That word is as loaded as the word syndrome. The very use of it becomes easy to see that intersection of identity and belonging when we decide who gets to be an insider and who is categorized as an outsider or an imposter. So those whose identities align with the overall social perception of who an industrial designer is are less likely to be categorized as imposters or feel imposter syndrome. They see themselves reflected in the industry and they feel like they belong. But for those who belong to a marginalized community, bias and inclusion can actually amplify feelings of insecurity and self-doubt, and they're multiplied by the very real exclusions and inequalities that they experience. So it's really a twofold impact.
All right, so we would love to introduce all of our beautiful panelists. I'm going to have Lindsay introduce herself first, and then Jonathan and Roxana. Thank you.
Okay, hi, I'm Lindsay. I'm trying a method which Amanda did recently on the AAPI Race and Design panel, which is introducing yourself as a person first and then what you do. So my name is Lindsay. I'm a queer woman. I am somebody who enjoys both the outdoors and video games in equal measure. So both inside and outside time at war at all times. And I also happen to be a senior industrial designer for Burn Helmets, which is also in the outdoor industry. And I, especially as a woman, feel that I have experienced imposter syndrome in many forms pretty much throughout my entire life. And that's all about me.
All right. What's up, everyone? My name's Jonathan. I'm originally from the Northern Virginia, DC area. I'm a Korean American first-gen designer, and I was in San Francisco from 2015 to 2020 working for Frog. And in 2020, February of 2020, I moved to Toronto to join Shopify as a senior industrial designer. So I mostly work with consumer electronics, but also have experience consulting for all different types of industries. And definitely excited to be here. I think imposter syndrome it's something that everyone experiences, and I've definitely experienced it in a lot of different ways. From starting off in the industry as an intern, I think there's a lot of feelings of feeling like an imposter when you start in the industry, and then also when I moved here to join as a senior designer, there was a lot of imposter syndrome around that too. So I'm excited to unpack some of these things with you all today.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hi, my name is Roxana Ghani. I'm a 42-year-old Iranian American, first generation American. And that's kind of where my imposter syndrome started back when I was in first grade and somehow was at fault for the Iran hostage crisis situation by all of the adults around me. So that's when I started to feel like I didn't belong, or I shouldn't be there. But then moving forward, I graduated I was a scholarship kid at a very expensive private university with a lot of trust fund kids, frankly. And I had to work all the time. And it was hard for me to afford materials to do model making for industrial design, et cetera, all of those things. And so I kind of got into the mindset of hustle culture back in college and also feeling like I wasn't, I shouldn't be there because I was a woman, because I was, my parents are foreign. The idea of design to my mom and dad is kind of a luxury. It's more about what you can afford, not what's the best solution for what you need. So even for me to not go to engineering school or medical school or law school, just to go to art school was even a big departure from the identity that my parents had set up for me, frankly. So that was another piece of it too. And that's just sort of just the start of it. And for the last 20 years, I've been working in soft goods, injection molding, bags, consumer electronics. And then the last 7 years, I've sort of shifted into color, material, and finish. I have a huge passion for materials, new materials and material design and tactile experiences, coatings, you know, that little moment where you don't really know why you like something, but you like it. That's a CMF person right there. But anyway, so yeah, that's me. I'm really excited to be here today. And thank you so much, Katarina and everybody as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay. So I just want to give one more quick breakdown on our group discussions while we have the deck up. We're going to close this down and go into our panel discussions, and we'll let our pinned panelists be full screen at that point. But just before we jump in, I did want to give one more quick description. Our small groups will consist of 10 attendees and 2 moderators each, one of whom will be a panelist or myself and Jamie. They'll last for about 30 minutes, and we'll be touching on themes that our panelists considered, and you can think about how they intersect with your own life or differ as well. So the questions that we use for the discussion coming up will be the same questions that you can reflect on in the small groups. So we will just remind you to be respectful, mindful, and engaged. So with all that being said, I will go ahead and stop sharing the deck. You should be able to see everyone here. I'm going to unpin the team and leave just the panelists up so that you guys can hear from them. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start us off with our first discussion question. Again, at any point during this event, if anyone has any questions or issues, please feel free to direct message myself or Jamie in the chat. And without any further ado, I'll go ahead and pose this question to our panelists. So I would ask, what structures are in place that make some designers feel imposter syndrome? And how does this relate to those designers' identities?
I'd like to just say one thing. When I got into the industry, when I graduated in 2000, it was pretty much an all-male affair. I had one woman that I worked with. I was actually quite fortunate, and but everybody was used to dealing with men. The people who weren't industrial designers were used to dealing with men. So, you know, you walk into the room and just because of your gender, you're excluded from having any sort of expertise. That was a big thing for me. And the notion of just having to be an expert and, you know, sort of know my stuff 120%. And be able to conduct myself and not be talked over. Big thing, even now in 2020, 2019, 2021, people love to talk about like what their husband or their wife thinks, you know, when you are the expert in the room. And so that's something that's certainly, you know, been coming up for me a long time. And it's the more you talk about it, and the more you bring it up, a lot of times the conversation shifts into what the individual needs to change rather than the system around. And I don't believe that, I'm not one of these people who's like, oh, everybody's a terrible driver, but me, you know, you're the terrible driver, right? Like, so like, but this is not that situation, you know, at work. Like the system is bad. I used to work with a guy, every time you said something he didn't know the answer to, he'd go, triggered? You know, and that behavior was acceptable. You know, see if I tried that, what would happen? Yeah. So that was sort of a big thing for me, was sort of this gender construct. And then also what women should be doing. You know how many times people ask me if I'm married or I have kids? They're not asking my male people that, my male colleagues that, you know? So there's a lot of expectation around like what you should be doing or thinking or where you should be at in your life before you even do your job, and dealing with that on top of the job stuff. It's way too much thinking about other people's feelings when you just need to do your job. And that was the biggest thing that I still struggle with these days.
Yeah. I can build on what you were saying a little bit. I wasn't in the industry, 20 years ago, but I still see, remnants of this. I think we're coming out of this age in the design world, or at least specifically the industrial design world, where, it's all about the ego. It's about the star designer, It's about these like romanticized cultures of somebody walks in and they're like, this is shit. And they like throw a model across the room, like we've all heard these stories, right?
Devil wears Prada. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, they're like, I'd be lying if I said I didn't buy into that at some point, like there's like a romance to it. Right. But I think we're in 2021, we're past that. And that, what's really coming to light is that behavior is actually quite toxic. And, but transitioning from that kind of era, there are a lot of designers who are more senior who grew up in this culture, right? And I find that, it feeds into the structures that are in place that we're talking about, because it's a generational thing that's being passed down to younger designers. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that concept of sort of like generational trauma, and we talked about this yesterday, it exists within our industry, and it makes people feel like crap for not being what industrial design was. I often talk about industrial design in general as feeling like it's behind. When I did the Women in Industrial Design panel, I talked about how it felt like we're having conversations now that every other industry had a long time ago. And all of that is a barrier for people coming into the industry who have this like old school mindset as a wall in front of them. And like the two lenses that I look at things through, I obviously have my own privileges, but I am a queer woman, and I also don't really come from means. So when I was in school, I was working all the time. To what Roxana said, like I couldn't afford my materials. I once built a Bondo, what essentially my professor called a bomb, because I made like a Bondo plugged plastic item to try and make something that would have been made out of wrench shape, but I couldn't afford $100 worth of wrench shape. And all of those things told me over and over again that this isn't the place for you. This isn't the job for you. I worked with people who were making car seats. They talked about very like heterosexual families, that the male's always going to be there to pick up the car seat when it's a little too heavy. So don't worry about it. And that told me like, you're not welcome here. You're not on this team. What I dislike about imposter syndrome, what Kat brought up in the beginning, is that I took that at the time and I said, that's my fault for being different. It's my fault for not having enough money. It's my fault for being a woman and trying to get into this industry. It's my fault for being queer, and I'm making everybody else feel weird that I want them to consider the way other families look. And in reality, it's an industry issue. And like, I feel like I rag on industrial design all the time, but it's because I care and I want it to be better. But like, I would examine the ways in which the industry made you feel that way and separate imposter syndrome for like, oh, this is all my fault. It's everything that I did.
And I want to just say one thing too, to Lindsay's point as well, and Jonathan's point is, if you are, in my opinion, if you are doing this job correctly, you are asking questions and you're observing, you are not making any assumptions about anything because you don't know anything. And you might have a process in place on how you approach a problem, but you certainly shouldn't be coming into a situation saying, oh, well, there's always going to be a guy there so he can lift a heavy car seat out. I mean, you failed at your job right there. Your job as an industrial designer should be, you should have the humility to ask questions, assume you don't know anything, nothing. Yeah, you might know about plastic. You might know about how an injection molding machine works. That's all great. You know about upholstery, wonderful. But you don't know how somebody is using this. And you can never assume that, even if you're doing it over and over again. And too often, in my experience, I've found that there is a real lack of observation and a lack of humility when it comes to asking questions and asking assumptions. And that just goes to underscore all those feelings, because you're the one sitting there going, well, wait a second. We don't know that. How do you know that? How do you know every family is a man and a woman, and an able-bodied man and a woman at that? And so you've already, and then you're the one who's going, well, hey, wait a second, let's ask these questions. And then you're getting shut down, tone policed, all of these things, all because somebody is uncomfortable with that moment of maybe like, gee, maybe I don't know everything. you know, and really the whole reason why anybody should be, you don't know anything when you're an industrial designer. You know how things get made, but you don't know what the solution is. So that's my 2 cents on that one too. And I really, I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah. And you only know what you've experienced, right? So, and the whole point of design is you're finding solutions for people that are not just you, right? So I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
It's way more fun that way anyway.
That's the thing too. Who wants to go in every day and just be like, well, you know, women like pink and men like blue.
Please.
You know, like,
please.
My wife loves pink. Okay, that's your wife. Yeah, I hate pink. You know, and like, you know what I mean? Like, you know. So anyway, you know, and who wants to be designing like that? That's the part I never understood. Was like, oh, you're just lazy. I get it. You don't want to do the work. You don't want to think outside the box. You just want to talk about what you're doing that's right in this situation, and everybody else is wrong. So anyway, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Jamie, do you want to go ahead and pose our second question?
Yeah, absolutely. So our second question is, what tips or tricks do you have for overcoming imposter syndrome? And how do you instill confidence in yourself and your work?
Okay, I'll start this one off. I'm very open about sharing this. I go to therapy. It is what has helped with a lot of this. I worked at places that made me feel horrible because I wanted things, because I advocated, because I wanted to do the industrial design that I thought we were supposed to be doing. And I'm very open about that time if you ever want to talk to me about it. But like, my hair fell out, I gained weight, I had like body pains all the time. And I was like, this, it's not sustainable. I can't do this. And I both removed myself from that situation as soon as I could. And I go to therapy, and what I use that for is to build a foundation. My confidence issues would date further back than me ever knowing what industrial design was. My confidence issues go back to me being like 10 years old. And so what I do with that is build a foundation that is stronger so that I can work on the things that are internal to me, fully outside of the industrial design world, that like make me feel insecure, so that I can go to the industrial design world, maybe sometimes feel like I'm an outsider and start feeling like crap about myself, but have a better foundation to go back to, a network of friends to go back to, like self-supporting, and then like reminding yourself that it's not you, it's an industry problem, which is really easy to say and hard to do.
Yeah, because I mean, it's so much easier to blame you, Lindsay, or blame me, or blame John, or blame whomever, than to go, gee, maybe we're not doing this right. Maybe our behavior isn't allowing to create the most innovative, exciting product. Yeah, it's a hard thing to stand up in that situation, especially if you're already feeling like an imposter. You know, it's really, really hard to raise your hand and say, this isn't right. So I was, for me, it was letting go of sort of, when I was growing up as a young person, didn't matter where you were from, if you were an immigrant, you were expected to assimilate, okay? And the more ethnic you were, or the darker you were, or whatever, the more obviously not white that you were, the more you were expected to assimilate. So I really grew up with this sort of idea and was conditioned with like Anglo normativity, white normativity, heteronormativity as well. And, you know, just to the point where you almost default to white, right? For lack of a better phrase, like, oh, yeah. Oh, you want to call me by not my full name because it's hard for you to pronounce? Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, we'll Americanize it. Yeah, you can call me Roxy. My name's Roxana. It's not even that hard to say. So like, I mean, I really, that's just how, even for me as a very white passing person, you know what I'm saying? You carry this stuff inside of you, and it builds and it builds and it builds. And so it took me a really long time to let go of that. I mean, a long time. You know, let's say in the last 5 years, I've sort of just started to get a handle on that. And I think the whole world is as well alongside with me, you know, that like, you know, this isn't always the default. So sort of just beginning to just sort of accept that that's not the default was a big thing for me. And also I was in a position that was very toxic. As Lindsay said, similar experience to her. I gained 40 pounds in 6 months. My blood pressure was 220/90. I was at risk of having a stroke. My hair was falling out. I had gone to my manager with a plan for what my career would look like, how, you know, we could build what I'm doing here and everything, you know, had a big talk about it, completely ignored. Told them about my health problems. Well, it's okay, my fault. Maybe you should lose some weight. Motherfucker said that to me. I should lose some weight in like 2019. And so I'm sorry. And that's just outrageous to me that anybody would say anything like, not a doctor, by the way, an industrial designer. And so I was feeling so low down, right? And feeling so, just so awful. And then on top of that, I love my job. I mean, I absolutely love my job. I love my job, and it's very hard for me to not say what I do first because I love my job so much. And I was actually working at a place where I could, where I had the freedom to work as much as I wanted and actually work on whatever projects I wanted. I had the tenure. I could say, and I had some freedom. And I'm also a kinesthetic learner. So I learn by doing. I learn by tactile experiences. I learn by building and making. So going to a factory is the best thing in the world for me. Seeing how things get made, it inspires and percolates. So none of my bosses wanted to go to China for 6 weeks. None of the project managers who were coming up with these projects based on their wife's opinion wanted to go and do the work, but I was willing to go and do the work. But I also got out of that horrible environment, right? And I love my job and I was real good at it. And people were jealous because they didn't have the relationships with factories. They're not able to talk to people. I'm an authentic, genuine person. I've been poor. I've worked very, very hard to get where I've gotten to. And I treat people the way I want to be treated. I've never once walked into a room and assumed that I'm better. And frankly, every single American person I have ever gone on a trip out of the country to India, China, Mexico, the caucasity is outrageous, frankly. Like just the audacity around thinking what is right, what is correct, what is this, what is that? You know, I absolutely, when I would get back from a China, well, how was the food? How do you think the food is here in the United States? Do you think it's that great? Because it's not. I hate to tell you that. You know, at least I'm getting fresh food, you know, and like, it's just, you know, so it's all these little microaggressions around white Anglo normativity. And that's for anybody, not just in the ID world, but it's especially egregious here because, again, our job is to observe, ask questions, have humility, not assume that you know anything. So when you're walking into, a job and you're dealing with that. So I'm just going to TLDR this. Sorry, guys. The main thing for me in this situation was snapping out of it. Stop trying to please everybody. You know, and really coming to terms and remembering the giant that I am, remembering the expert that I am, and remembering the bad bitch that I am. You know, there is no reason for anybody to make themselves small for somebody else and for a job. And that's one of those things you hear all the time. Don't make yourself small. Don't make yourself small. That's true. But really let that click and coalesce with who you are. And I think that's the biggest part of imposter syndrome is thinking that you have to be small, you have to be something different, and you're not good enough to be here when you absolutely are good enough to be here. And as somebody with a 20-year career, please, I want anybody but white men in this industry talking, designing, bringing perspective. Like I'm so tired of the one note that is industrial design. And as Lindsay and Jonathan said earlier, there's a generational trauma here, right? And then there's also, the industry hasn't caught up at all. It hasn't, period. It's still very much, you know, one note, one opinion, one person designing products for everybody.
And it's not like ID is an easy job too. Like to layer all of that stuff on top of the work we actually have to do.
Yeah.
Working with manufacturers, coming up with concept sketching, CAD, rendering. There's so many elements of industrial design, right? So, I mean.
Yeah, and then on top of that, Jonathan, to your point, and then people are asking you to be worried about their feelings and their opinions when you can't even have your expertise or your opinion, right? It's, and then, you're trying to keep all the plates spinning and make the launch, bring the product to market, do all of that, not choke the sexist, like, it's just like, it is a lot. And then one day you find yourself 40 pounds heavier in a short amount of time and you have clumps of hair falling out. And it's really, clumps of hair falling out and fistfuls of hair falling out. And you're telling your doctor, no, I don't have a cocaine problem. This is just stress. Like, this is why my heart is like, no, really. They're like, we don't understand what is going on. It was that, like that. And then I sort of realized too, like, these people and this system that was physically harming me. Yeah, I'm responsible for my health. That's true, but also I just had to you just got to remember who you are and your self-worth. And sometimes if you don't have this, something Jonathan and I and Lindsay, we all talked about yesterday, was that sometimes maybe you don't have the tenure. I have a career, right? Mm-hmm. You've been doing this for 4 or 5 years. Maybe you don't have that tenure or you don't have that experience under your belt. And it's hard to remember who you are in that space. And that's why I'm really harping on the whole idea of like questioning, having humility. Those are why I love working with new designers, especially fresh designers at a job. It doesn't mean if they're new, like they just got out of school. They're new designing in this field. Right? Because they have a fresh take. Mm-hmm. They haven't been designing a phone case for 4 years. They know, they're all looking at it with this new set of eyes and a new set of questions. And that's really just something I always really want to encourage people when they start to feel like they don't belong, to start questioning. And never, United States has a problem with obedience to authority, a huge problem with that.
Hey, Roxana, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to time check really quick. We're running up on our time for our small group discussions. And I do just want to give Jonathan one chance to kind of answer the question on tips and tricks before we break out. So I love it. Let's carry this through in the small group discussions and continue those conversations. But Jonathan, if you want to quickly kind of touch on any of your recommendations for how to keep your confidence up before we break out. Thank you so much, guys.
Roxana, we could talk for hours. No, but don't apologize. We could talk always like all day. Yeah. And yeah. For me, tips and tricks, I think the main reason I was so excited for this talk is like, I just wanted to let people know that they're not alone in this feeling. And I don't know, maybe I'm so jaded, but I think it's not like you're going to walk away from this talk and then all of a sudden you're going to not have imposter syndrome at work. I think it's a very human thing, actually. So, one thing that has helped me is community, right? Talking with other people who have gone through it. So, I just wanted to add my voice to this really important conversation. And in terms of a tip, I shared this yesterday, but pretty early on in my career, when I was an intern, which is really kind of scary entering the industry because you just don't have all the context, right? And you're also learning how to become an adult, mid-20s, early 20s. And there was a senior mechanical engineer that I work with. And one time he just told me kind of off the cuff, he's like, don't sweat it, man. Like, everyone's figuring it out. Adulthood is a myth, and that's not even design related. He's talking about just being an adult. It's everyone, no one knows what they're doing. Everyone is kind of figuring it out as they go. And that really kind of unlocked the way I approached and saw different meetings moving forward. So I just wanted to share that bit with everyone, that as someone might feel very, very accomplished on paper, on whatever social media, whatever it is, but in reality, everyone is human and they're figuring it out. So yeah, I just want to let everyone know that they're not alone. Yeah.
I think that's such an important point too, is a myth of adulthood.
Yeah.
Everybody, half the time people are just doing what they think adults should do.
Mm-hmm.
I like
What even
refer
is
to it
that?
as, yeah, I like lay down the train tracks as the train is like just over the edge of no tracks anymore. That's how I'm doing adulthood.
Oh my gosh.
Squeaking by.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. That's really it. It's like, we're doing it live. Phenomenal. I want to give Jamie a chance to give us a quick intro to the breakout rooms, just rehash some of the points that we mentioned before. And we're actually keeping an eye on the size of the event. We're actually going to do 3 breakout rooms, so it works out perfectly. We'll each have one room with one panelist, and then we'll have some additional moderators from the team joining. So Jamie, I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so these small group discussions are intended to be a safe space to discuss our experiences with imposter syndrome. We ask that you consider the themes that our panelists touched on and consider how they intersect or differ from your own. Each small group will have approximately 10 people, and you'll have some moderators, which we've already discussed. And there will be some discussion questions that we ask and serve as a framework for how this will all go. Just remember to be respectful of your fellow attendees and respect the different experiences that we all bring to the room. Okay. And then if you have any questions, just let us know. Okay.
Yep, and your moderators will let you know who they are, so feel free to direct message them or the panelists if you have any concerns or questions, and the main room will be open. If the conversation feels like you need a break, no worries, feel free to hop back in. But without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and send everybody out to their small rooms. Just a reminder. All right, I have restarted the recording. So just for everybody's information, everything that you share in this recap, just be aware that we're encouraging you to talk about what we've discussed in these small groups, but we just want to make sure that the experiences that your fellow attendees shared today are kept in confidence. So let's feel free to discuss broad themes and the applications of what you discussed, but just make sure to avoid names and clarifying details. If somebody wants to speak to their own story, they're welcome to, but let's not put people out here. And then respect the trust that your fellow attendees have given when they shared their experiences with you. So I'll unpin Jamie and I in a sec, but what we really want to do here is give the floor to the whole group. Everybody here has, I think, learned something today, and we want to share that back with not just the group here, but with the broader community. So feel free to share things that you think were helpful to you, but that would also be helpful to folks who weren't able to join us in these conversations today. So Jamie, if you have anything else to say, feel free.
Yeah, well, I think that's all. But if anyone would like to begin sharing any sort of social media or contact information in the chat, now would be the time. And then make sure that you save that before we close our event.
Awesome. Let's see. Somebody may need to assist me. I think I've unpinned everybody. Can you see the speaker view with all attendees as well, or is it still pinning? Looks like I may have still Jamie pinned still. Thanks for your patience, everyone. Okay, there we go. All right, and feel free to turn your video on and your audio, and we'd just love to have a conversation with everybody.
I can break the ice by just saying that was awesome, just to be in an intimate space and kind of share stories. And everyone in my breakout room had to come from different backgrounds, from UX to engineering, transitioning into ID to ID student. So it was really nice to hear everyone's stories for sure.
I just, for me, for the breakout room was really just exciting too, to hear about all these new career paths. Su Young mentioned femcare, inclusivity design, UX design, just this so much broader spectrum around ID than like a marker rendering and a new plastic thing. You know, it's real cool. It's real cool. I really like it. Yeah. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. I think something we talked about that I really liked was like different strategies for like advocating for the things that you care about at work. I know it's a little bit off tangent from some of the imposter syndrome stuff that we spoke about. But yeah, I guess one of the things that Lindsay said that resonated with me was, you know, if you're going to, you know, take a stand, being ready and, you know, working through all of the thinking and the hard work of figuring out what you want to say and how you're going to stand up for yourself and prioritizing what you care about can really help you in that moment, not be overcome by those feelings of insecurity or doubt and feel like you're able to, you know, project confidently what you want to say.
I want to share something that Jonathan mentioned in the end of our breakout room discussion, which really resonated with me. I think we, like a lot of us can probably all relate to this, that like there are definitely moments that we felt like our work, oh, this is being recorded. Okay, I'm gonna try to make sure that I address this in a way that, you know, that's appropriate. So, like, I mean, I think there's definitely has been challenging moments here and there at work or like when you're in school. So I think, I mean, we're all human beings and we will get upset, we will get frustrated, and sometimes we can come off as defensive. But I think a really good strategy that Johnson mentioned is to think about the things that brings you the most joy at work, or at your, I guess, at your school or at your program, at your study. And I think one thing he also mentioned is about like it's hard to not feel like you want to compare yourself with others. Like I share that as well in the group, that I'm very competitive and it's really hard for me to not want to compare myself with others. So I think it's just good to kind of remind yourself to every once in a while to take a step back and then think about what's really bringing you the most joy about what you do. And from there, I think like truly celebrating that instead of focusing on things that tends to stress you out the most, like the comparison and everything. So yeah, thank you for this event. Also, like the breakout room, it was really great to be able to share some stories, personal stories.
Yeah, I think Roxana, Jonathan, and I kind of talked from the perspective of people who have been working for a bit. And I had people in my group who were students, and I realized that like there's definitely the culture that exists at work also exists at school. And we're talking about like people who wear like the badge of honor of like having stayed up all night, and how that can make you feel like you're not doing the right thing. So you are not a bad designer if you do not eat, sleep, and breathe design. In fact, I think you're probably a bad designer if you do, because you're not listening to other things and you're not experiencing the world. 100%. And that applies both at work and at school.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to add to that is that at least here in San Francisco Bay Area, you can start feeling like your value is tied to the work or the job. The job that you have. So I think one thing that I would try to keep in mind, that I'm still like a good designer, even if I'm not working at like the top design agency. And I think it's sometimes hard for me to like, to forget, or it's easy for me to forget that, because the zeitgeist are just like, it's just everywhere around here.
A real one thing we also talked about in our room too, Tiffany brought it up, is normalizing failure, right? Things don't go right. People mess it up. They don't know how to do their job. They screw something up. They get fired. They do the wrong thing. Like all of those things are really normal parts in growth and growing and learning from your mistakes and those sorts of things. So if you screw something up, right? Just try not to be so hard on yourself and use it as a learning moment. And I know everybody says that, but that's the truth. Like that really is a real truth. Yeah.
I think one thing that resonated with me was something that Jonathan said in a panel discussion was how his mechanical engineering friend said, everyone's just pretending, like we're trying to do the right thing. We don't really know if it's the right thing. We're just doing what we think we're supposed to do. And it's, I think what struck me was that you kind of found that advice or that comfort from a cross-functional team member. And I would encourage people to, continue to interact with your team, whether they're an engineer, whether they're from sourcing, et cetera, because likely they have the same sentiments as you at their work. I feel like designers are always very like grouped together, just siloed with each other. And while that experience is aligned because of your career, it's not necessarily the case. So, kind of cross-pollinate across teams and talk to each other because likely they're experiencing the same issues as you are.
And to learn too. It's just kind of fun, to get out of this silo.
Yeah.
The Devil Wears Prada design team, it's like, yeah, it's really nice. But I like that part too, Tiffany, that you heard that from another team member, Jonathan, not just from, yeah.
Yeah. We talked about this in our group briefly, but the community aspect is so important. I was sharing how I remember every single time that a team member, ID or not ID, maybe there was a really rough crit who reached out and was like, hey, let's go grab a coffee, or like, those things stick. And I think that's why these conversations are important, because we want to pay those kinds of things forward, right, to our workplaces and to our communities. So there's that piece. And I had a little bit of audio trouble, but I just wanted to also address something I think Nino was talking about. I caught the end of it, something about certain design firms, you were saying? Yeah. So I brought this up as well. I think kind of going back to the question we were talking about earlier about what structures are in place that kind of feed into imposter syndrome. I think there is the way that our industry puts certain people, studios on a pedestal, the way we kind of talk about, or like that, it's adding to the toxicity, right? It's adding to this feeling of people feeling like they're not designers because they don't work at a certain job. I just wanted to address that. It's bullshit, and you are completely, if not more, of a valid designer by, don't try to remove the feeling of like you're not a designer because of that. I just want to throw that out there because it is something I see a lot in our industry. So yeah.
That was a huge thing for me when I first started my career, Jonathan. I'm like little bit like kind of floored, remembering this feeling of like, I didn't get a job at IDEO and I was working at corporate doing I was working for Samsonite. And I was designing luggage and bags and that sort of thing. And that was my first job. And I remember feeling like a corporate shill. And if I was a real industrial designer, I'd be at a design firm, designing all sorts of different things and all of that. But I will say that job has gotten me every single job I've ever gotten. It's that first job at the corporate, designing the same thing, which is not the same thing. There's so much to learn about, right? So yeah, I that is such a big thing, Jonathan, of like, just not feeling like an imposter because you don't have a job at where. Yeah.
And if you're a student too, one thing we talked about was, there are those students in your class who are also put on a pedestal. It's just a micro version of the same thing. But I really encourage students to, no one has had the experience that you have had in life and what you bring to the table. So celebrate those things. And yeah, anyway,
Yeah, what I'm hearing, I feel like, is that there's no one right way to be an industrial designer. You know, the job is in and of itself, like, so diverse, depending on what you work on and where you work and what your workplace looks like, that there's no way that one type of person who fits into a box could possibly represent this whole industry. So yeah, to that point, I think we can really, you know, celebrate what makes us different, because I think that that's what makes our team so strong. And, you know, everybody who comes in with a different experience is bringing something fresh to the table and combining that to make some really amazing ideas. But yeah, it's just, it couldn't be a monolith. Our industry is too like divergent across too many different areas.
Oh, I want to add something to what everyone has said so far. I'm trying really hard to find the episode that I originally listened to from Unlocking Us by Brene Brown, but I don't think I'm able to remember. But Kat, if I find it, I'll definitely share it with you if you want to share with the rest of the audience. Because one thing that I heard from one of the episodes, I mean, obviously she's been interviewing with people who are very accomplished in their own field, and it was really surprising to me to hear that one of them said that, like, I think it might be Roxanne Gay, and she said that even though I've accomplished a lot, and like I'm constantly getting invited to speak at different things, I've written a book, and like all that, but the imposter syndrome, or like feeling the feeling of needing the external validation, it doesn't stop. Like, it does not stop, and it actually gets worse as you age and as you get more accomplished. I thought it was so fascinating, and because I never really thought that it would happen to someone like her or whoever that was. And but I think something that I've been talking to my therapist about is also that like the not needing to seek for external validation. And then I think relating back to what Jonathan said, like, to really find the true joy that you're getting out of what you do, I feel like can sometimes really help you bring back to the perspective and also help you ground yourself further.
I love that. And I really want to end on a note of joy. So I think with that, I think that's the perfect gem to wrap things up, is that just keep your North Star, the things that bring you joy, what makes you love design, and remind yourself that you are, wonderful. Find those sources of affirmation and validation within the community, and continue to build the networks. I think everybody here today, please connect with each other, continue these conversations outside of this space. And we're just so grateful to have you, have been a part of this conversation today. So I'll let Jamie offer a few closing remarks.
Thank you. Okay, so I just want to thank you all again for being a part of our first Dialogues event. It'll be made available on YouTube soon through the Advanced Design account. Please stay tuned for our next event, which will center on finding work in the age of COVID-19. We hope to see you there, and we hope to see you in many other events as well. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. This was great. Yeah.
Bye, everyone.